Mr. Lapkowski originally wanted the title of my talk to be something about ladies first. If you're familiar with the Chazal, Rashi tells us in this week's Pasha that when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, Hashem gave Moshe two instructions. And there are two very interesting details about those two instructions. First of all, he told them to speak to the women and then to the men. And secondly, he told them to speak to the women softly and to the men firmly. So this is one of the most beautiful allusions in Torah to the way the Eibishter, the way Hashem feels that with men you have to be tough and with women you have to be soft. And also the idea that women were spoken to first. And I said to Mrs. Lapkowski, when I'll be a woman, I'll talk about that topic. I'm one of those people who believes that women's issues should be discussed by women. It makes sense. I don't think that's a big... I'm going to tell you how women are equal in Torah. Wow, that's... what's the right word? That's pretty pretentious. So we changed the topic. I just wanted you to know what the other topic was. So at least we touched on the topic that we're not going to talk about. The topic that's written on the page is internalizing the Sinai experience. Internalizing the Sinai experience. This week is, of course, Mattan Torah. It's the week where we read the section in the Torah that describes the events of God giving us the Torah. And here's what I'd like to share. Number one, we read this Torah portion twice. We read it in the regular sequence of reading the Parshas Shavuos, and we also read it on the time of year, or in the time of the year that the event actually occurred, on the holiday of Shavuos. We're reading the event of God giving us Torah this week for no reason other than it's the next piece of Chumash, right? The tradition is that each year we complete the whole Torah, and the way we do this is that each week we study one of what amounts to is 54 sections, or 53 sections of the Torah. And it so happens that this week we read Parshas Yisro, the Torah portion that describes God, the event of God giving us the Torah. And as a result, it appears that in many communities, for many people, this Shabbos is a Shabbos like any other. That this Shabbos is distinct, that this Shabbos is special, so to speak, it's lost. Because we don't pay attention to the particular of this week's Pasha, that it describes the events of God giving us the Torah. Instead, it's the next piece of Torah. While on Shavuos, we make a very big deal out of it. We prepare ourselves, right? We actually count days from Pesach to Shavuos. We're counting the days in anticipation of the holiday. We do all kinds of things. We decorate the shul as the Har Sinai was decorated in certain communities, and so on and so forth. It all creates an excitement, it creates an anticipation, and most important of all, it creates an awareness of the reality of the event. God is giving us the Torah. And there's a little story, a little anecdote, which I'm going to share, that one of the Chabad Rebbes, and the names I don't remember, when he was a child, asked his father or his grandfather to explain to him the significance of reading the Torah this week, where we read the events of God giving us the Torah, versus the significance of God's giving us the Torah as we read it on the holiday of Shavuos. And he gave him an interesting answer, and the answer needs to be explained. The answer that he gave him was that on Parshas Yisro, this week's Parsha, Hashem gives us the Torah like, this is the quote, like a king in the field. Familiar? Right? Anybody who's been around your elders familiar with the term king in the field? Did ever use that expression? Like the king in the field. On Shavuos, God is giving us the Torah like the king in the palace. Now, for those who are not familiar with this analogy, which is discussed at great length in Hasidus, I'll give you a brief version of it. We don't have time to give you a lengthy version of it. The short version is as follows. A king, because of his position, is required to present himself in a certain way. A king does not have the options of being casual, of being social, of just mingling with the populace. Halachically, in Jewish law, when the laws of kings are discussed, a king must always appear royal, and he must always behave in a way that presents him to the population as being above, distinct, a different kind of a person. What he does in the privacy of his home is his business, to an extent, but his public image has to be one of an individual who's above the society. To maintain that, there are many things that are done. In general, it's the whole etiquette that surrounds a king. It's the mystery of a king. It's the inaccessibility, the fact that it's difficult to reach a king. All of these things intensify the aura, and so to speak, the sense of awe that people feel towards the king. For example, if a person wants to talk to the king, they have to make an appointment. And the appointment has to be examined by a half dozen people who will determine whether that person's intent, the person's issue, is worthy of an actual audience. And many a person is told, sorry sir, your issue is not significant enough, go meet with a senator, go meet with somebody else. You can't have an appointment with the king himself. So there's a whole bunch of stops, blockages, restraints put into play that affect that the king's existence is very exciting. It's very awe-inspiring. And it's more than what we have, it's what we don't have, the lack of access to the king that puts the king on this pedestal. And in Yiddishkeit, in our service to God, there is that concept. There's the concept of the king in the palace. Right? We know God is a king, God is removed from us, and so on and so forth. And we're therefore taught in Torah that if we want to go into the king, we need to prepare ourselves. We can't just march right into the king. There's a whole procedure by which we access the king. In Torah life, the time of actually visiting the king is when we pray. But you don't just pray. You have to prepare yourself. You have to focus. Right? There's all kinds of laws that govern how one has to prepare himself for davening, except that if you don't meet those criteria, you're not going to be thrown out of the palace. God's a nice guy. But nevertheless, if we want to connect to the king, there's all kinds of etiquette, all kinds of rules and restraints and restrictions about how this is accomplished. Then there is what's called the king in the field. The king in the field essentially means the king where he goes out to the population for whatever reason and he descends. He takes off his royal garb, he sends off his whole, accompaniment, all those people who scare everybody else away by their the force of their presence, and he socializes. And he's available to the people. Anybody can talk to him about anything. The king in the field gives a special kind of access of the common person to the king, the kind of access that he probably would never have while the king was in the palace. But there's a major setback to the king in the field. And that is that it's not difficult to forget that it's the king, because he's not acting like a king. He's available in a way that's so free, that's so unrestrained, that's so without any borders, that it's very easy to forget who we're talking to. And of course, what's wrong with forgetting who you're talking to? Obviously, you can behave in a disrespectful way, but most importantly, you can not appreciate the opportunity. And in Hasidus, there's a lengthy discussion about these two conditions, that there's a relationship between God and man, which is called the king in the field, where he's very accessible, but we have a tendency to say, what's the big deal? Then there are times that the king is inaccessible, we're all excited, but at those moments we can't reach him. So we read this event of God giving us the Torah twice each year. One time we read it, and nobody even notices. That's this week, that's tomorrow in Shul. It's part of a pattern. Every week we read another section. Well, this week we happen to be reading this section of Yisro. In Judaism, there's no happens to be. Everything is precise, everything is divinely ordained. And whether a big deal is made out of it or a big deal is not made out of it, the event of reading the Torah, the event of giving the Torah in Shul is meaningful. It's real, it's God giving us the Torah. But He's giving us the Torah in such a way that if we choose to, we won't even notice. Or said in other words, that unless we pay special attention, it won't even happen for us. So this is an interesting week, Parshas Yisro. It's a regular Parsha, but it's a most extraordinary Parsha. What's distinct about it is it's the kind of thing that is special only if we make it special. Because the culture of Yiddishkeit doesn't provide that aura for you. You have to provide it for yourself. Shavuos, on the other hand, there's so much preparation. There's so much done leading up to the event, to the holiday, that you're almost drawn into the fever, you're almost drawn into the energy, to the dynamism of the occasion, even if you have no intentions of being drawn in. It's just what's going on. And therefore, in a way, Shavuos is a far more meaningful event of receiving the Torah, or God giving us Torah, than is Yisro, right? But the flip side to the coin, of course, is that any time you or I have an experience that's very exciting and very dynamic, right? It's wonderful. Experiences that are dynamic and exciting are wonderful. Why? Because they move us. But also, they're artificial. They're not us. They're the experience. A person walks into a wedding hall, there's so much energy. They're drawn into the energy. They become happy by osmosis. It's not their joy. It's the joy of the room. Now, it's not so terrible, but in the end, they can walk out of that hall and in a very short time not take the experience with them because it wasn't their experience. And it's a unique kind of challenge that when you find yourself in an environment where everything is very intense, you shouldn't lose your personal identity. And the purpose for not losing your personal identity is not because you have a big ego or you don't want to get swept away, but because you want to experience it. You don't want to get lost in the experience. The difference is when you get lost in the experience, it's really not you. You've been circumvented, you've been pushed aside because of this power, because of this energy, because of this force. And when you go away from that experience, when that energy's gone, you really haven't taken that much with you. But when there's something happening that's entirely quiet, and that's in a way, so to speak, passive, there isn't this in your face, this superimposed dynamism that's saying, hey, wake up, God's giving the Torah. On the one hand, it's difficult because I want to roll over and go back to sleep. On the other, if a person tunes in to the reality of this event and, so to speak, receives the Torah from God, there's a certain element of personal reality that supersedes, that's greater than the experience of Mattan Torah and Shavuos. Precisely because it's no big deal. Precisely because there's no big tzimis, there's no big, fanfare and preparation made in relationship to this event, it forces a certain measure of honesty from us that a holiday like Shavuos in a way takes away, or at least makes unusually challenging. So there's a little philosophy, reality, life that's connected to this week's Parsha. It's a special Parsha, but it's only special if you choose to make it special. If you choose not to make it special, then it's just another portion. The way I looked at it as a kid was, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the portions of the Torah, some of them are long and some of them are shorter. Parshas Yisro is one of the short ones. And so it means you get home a few minutes earlier from shul. But that's the least significant part of Parshas Yisro. In any event, so that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction. The title of my talk is Internalizing the Sinai Experience. To even get to the word internalization, which is a wonderful, wonderful word that I'm not so sure how one grasps, we have to first talk about the Sinai experience. Internalization is another part of it here. What is the Sinai experience? It's very, very important as Jews that we properly understand the Sinai experience. And I had opportunity by the yeshiva vacation that we had last month, whenever it was, we talked about it, and I'm going to talk about it again now. It's important, it's imperative to we understand the Sinai experience. First of all, one of the most important aspects of the Sinai experience was we were all there. We were all there. It says spiritually, it says in Jewish writings, in the mystical, in the Midrash Chazal, that even people who were not physically alive, their souls were present when the Torah was given. But that's already another level. Every Jew alive, man, woman, child, whether they were from the 12 tribes or from the Erev Rav, from the Jews that sort of came along, that converted because they saw the great success of the Jewish people, everyone was there. Nobody heard about it from somebody else. And Chazal tells, Rashi mentions it in Chumash, if a person couldn't see, he was healed. If a person couldn't hear, he was healed. If a person couldn't stand, he was healed. God wanted everybody there with all their senses. He doesn't want that the foundation of Judaism should be based on anybody telling anybody else what to do. If you want to know what's the experience of Sinai, the experience of Sinai is a personal communication between God and every individual Jew. There's no Moses. Moshe is very important. Moshe plays the part of the arbitrator, of the negotiator. Moshe plays the part of the intermediary. But the actual event of Sinai, what distinguishes Sinai from all other prophecies, from all other Jewish events, is nobody received it in a way that we call hearsay. You didn't have to believe somebody else. And there are people in this world, historically, who have achieved an enormous measure of credibility. Moshe Rabbeinu was very credible. The Jewish people saw all the miracles he performed. They saw the special, intimate relationship God had with him. So Moshe was credible. When Moshe spoke, the Jewish people didn't have too much difficulty accepting that when Moshe said, were the words of God, notwithstanding that perhaps Moshe said some stuff that was, shall we say, inconsistent, right? And there were a number of uprisings. If you're familiar with the Chumash, Jews were Jewish then too, and they had the same stubbornness and tendency towards, towards disobedience, towards seeing things the wrong way that we have. But nevertheless, Moshe had an enormous measure of credibility. And on the basis of this special credibility that Moshe Rabbeinu had, if Moshe came and said, God said, everybody should stand on their head, it was something that people would say, okay, God said, got to learn how to make a headstand. But that's not the experience of Sinai. You can make the case that's the experience of Torah, right? The beauty of Torah, the timelessness of Torah, is based on a principle that's called Messiah. Messiah means the transmission, the passing of the torch. In the beginning of the Pirkei Avos, the Ethics to Our Fathers, we read about the Messiah of Torah. Moshe received Torah from God. He handed it to Yeshua. Yeshua handed it to the elders, and the elders handed it to the prophets, and the prophets handed it to the members of the Great Assembly. There is this constant changing of the guards, but it's uninterrupted, right? The reason Torah is Torah, and Torah doesn't get pushed around and adapted to every culture's bellyaches, is because there is a very powerful link to before. Every, the expression, when you get smicha, I got smicha, which I'm too embarrassed to hang my smicha on the wall because I don't deserve it. But I have it someplace. When I was ordained, so basically you have all these tests, and then the Rosh Hashiva gave me a lecture. And he said to me, you have to understand. And I was saying, yeah, like I was very uncomfortable with it, but I said to him, I guarantee you, I am never going to use this smicha. I will never ever. Paske Shas Azarov. You have to get smicha, you get smicha. But okay, he said to me, you have to understand that this ordination is another link in a chain. You got smicha from somebody who else has smicha, from somebody else who has smicha. The first person to get smicha was Moshe Rabbeinu, who placed his hands on Yeshua's head, and he literally leaned on him. The word smicha means to lean on somebody else. And the tradition of Torah is based on the transmission from generation to generation. The second generation is not new. The second generation's entire identity is that it continues the old. Sure, there is a concept of Chedushay Torah, of innovations in Torah, but it's all in the spirit of Messiah, of being transmitted. But it's transmitted from a few people to a few people, or maybe more than a few people. It's not many people who are considered, so to speak, the essence of the continuity of Torah. But that is not the Sinai experience, that's the Torah experience. The Sinai experience is not an event that anybody hears from anybody else. It's an event that we all personally experience. And if I may say so, this is one of the things that separates the Jewish religion from other faiths. As the Rebbe would say it, if you trusted everybody, if you believed the Muslims and what they say, and the Christians and what they say, and other faiths and what they say, in other words, you took everybody for face value, the distinction of the event that marks the birth of the Jewish faith versus other faiths is that it's not the word of a few. It's a special emphasis in Torah, and it's discussed with tremendous, tremendous passion. The event of the giving of the Torah was not God telling Moses to tell us. It was God talking to us directly. That's the event of the giving of the Torah. And it's especially important. And I'll share with you an interesting commentary. And perhaps I shouldn't share it, but perhaps I should. I'm sure in the course of your long lives, you've met a missionary or two. And if you have, you are familiar with their lexicon. What's interesting is that so many of their ideas come from Torah. When a missionary does his work, what is the word that he uses? He witnesses. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. Right? Witnesses. Well, guess what? Where did they get that idea from? They got it from Torah. The event of Mattan Torah, the Rambam calls Edus, witness. That's the word he uses. He says prophecy is based on trust. I'm believing you, or that person, or somebody else. But that's prophecy is in as much as prophecy is concerned. God has messages to send. He sent it through an individual. Even Torah. Torah is higher than prophecy, but nevertheless, Torah has credibility because Moshe has credibility. Because we trust Moshe. You take away Moshe's credibility, Torah doesn't have any credibility. Because it's based on the fact that we believe that he didn't make the stuff up as he went along. You understand? And that's why there's, of the 13 principles of faith, one of those 13 principles is I believe that all prophets are true, and I believe that Moses is the father of all the prophets. It's one of the aspects of the 13 principles of faith, is that Moshe is Avi Kol HaNeviim, and that all of the words of Moses' prophecy is true. But that's all separate from the experience of Sinai. The experience of Sinai is not hearsay. The experience of Sinai is God speaking to every single Jew. Now, you and I don't remember that experience. Happened a long time ago, nevertheless. Spiritually, when we have a Shabbat like this one, where there is the reading, there's the re-experiencing of this event, and especially on Shavuos, where we make such a big tumult out of it, even though we're not experiencing God intimately, the meaning of reading this Torah portion, the meaning of going through the celebration is that on a spiritual level this event is recurring. It's not just historical, not just remembering what it was. On a spiritual level this event is recurring. And the meaning of this event, the significance of this event, is that God doesn't want a Jew to be Jewish because of another Jew. Every Jew is Jewish because of a personal relationship with God Almighty Himself. That's the Sinai experience. And this explains a number of interesting particulars about the Sinai experience. The most notable is, think about this. God came down to earth, right? Not like He was any place other than in earth. God's all over, but nevertheless, He appeared, right? In some way, which is in itself very difficult to comprehend, God emerged. God materialized. God was somehow known to us. We were able to identify His presence within the context of time and space, which is truly philosophically impossible to comprehend. But that's a philosophy discussion. That's for another day. Okay? And we all saw God. And what did He tell us? You know what He told us? A bunch of stuff that we already knew. Really? He's making one appearance. I was once on Merkish Lichas, and I met a Jew, a very wonderful Jew. He called himself a secular Jew. And we had a conversation, and he had a very simple question. You know what? I never answered for him. When's God going to show up again? When we're going to have a second visit? He comes on the scene. He makes this big deal in a desert, and he vanishes. Hasn't been back since. Mashiach is going to be a re-emergence of the Eibishter, like it says in Midrash, like Rashi brings it in Shir Hashirim. We need another, once every couple of 100 years, maybe, once every 100 years, 50 years. Okay, once in 1,000 years. Make another appearance, make a curtain call. No, it's a lot. One of the things that's so frustrating about the Eibishter is he has so much patience. Oh, it drives us crazy. He has so much patience when we do good, he has so much patience when we do evil, that it's so difficult to remember that He's still paying attention. But nevertheless, He made one appearance. And what did He tell us? A bunch of stuff that we already knew. Literally. We needed Him to tell us, don't kill. Hey, God, say something that we're not going to figure out by ourselves. Why are you telling us what we know already? What's the first thing God says? I am God. Hello? I am God. And then you're not allowed to worship idols. We knew we're not supposed to worship idols. We knew we're not supposed to mention God's name in vain. And even the one about Shabbos. Jews kept Shabbos in Mitzrayim, according to the Midrash Chazal. And the Jews were taught about Shabbos in advance of Mattan Torah. Literally everything God told us when He gave us the Torah we knew already. It doesn't make any sense. What is the answer? There are many answers to the question. And one of the answers is because when God came down to earth, it wasn't what He said that was important. It was the simple fact that He appeared. The experience of Mattan Torah is not about Torah, it's about God. The experience of God giving us the Torah is not about the knowledge and the scholarship and the laws even. Okay? Yes, it is about the Ten Commandments, naturally. But you know what? The commentaries tell us that when you read the Ten Commandments, they're not fully qualified. The particulars of the Ten Commandments are discussed in next week's Parshas Mishpatim, when it's explained what it means idol worship, when it's explained what it means honoring or dishonoring a parent, when it's explained what it means stealing and killing and so on and so forth. The Ten Commandments are real, but the information found within the Ten Commandments themselves is not yet sufficient to know what I should and shouldn't do. You need help. You need some other stuff to qualify further the Ten Commandments so that the Ten Commandments can be practiced. And the reason for this is, again, because the event of Mattan Torah is not about what God said, it's the simple fact that He appeared. And it is for the same reason that we say we're all there. Everybody was present. Nobody could say he was more at the giving of the Torah than somebody else. The greatest scholar, the most pious Jew, and the most rebellious troublemaker. They were all equal when it came to the event of God giving us Torah. Everybody was equal. And I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to God, you really can't be any closer any further. When it comes to understanding God, sure, some people understand Him better, some people don't understand Him as well. When it comes to perhaps experiencing God in our emotions, some people are more sensitive, more able to experience, the energy of the Eibishter, of God Almighty than others. But when it comes to the simple truth of God, we all have the same relationship. And there are only two possibilities. A, we don't have any relationship at all. Or B, we have a real relationship. There are no degrees, there are no measures in our relationship with God. And the logic to it is obvious. God is infinite. So the smallest point of God is the whole infinity of God. God is indivisible. God doesn't have a body with parts. You can't grab the toes of God. Whatever God is, He is. In a unity, in a plainness. And as a result, the relationship that we have with God doesn't know any distinction. In society, in life, in people, there are different types. Right? We're all individuals. We're all in different worlds. We all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And consequently, in our Jewishness, we would have, for the most part, the same strengths and weaknesses that we would have in our personality. Right? Believe it or not, our personality is part of Judaism too. But that's all about what we do and how we feel about it and how we understand it. In the relationship with God, we're all equal. And that's the emphasis in the experience of Sinai. The experience of Sinai is about God appearing, that's all. And God doesn't want anybody getting in between. Not even Moses. When it comes to the experience of the Hashem Yisbarach Himself, the experience of God Almighty Himself, it's a personal experience. You and I and everybody else has a personal relationship. God appears to each one of us. If you wanted to say what I just said using Hasidic lexicon, in other words, say the same thing but say it perhaps a little bit more philosophically, you would say it as follows. You would say it as follows. There's a lot of levels and layers to a person. Right? There are conscious levels, there are subconscious levels, there are sub-subconscious levels, right? And should I continue? You get the idea. There are a lot of levels of a person. The distinction between one person and another is in so many ways. We're distinct in our intelligence. We're distinct in our sensitivity. We're distinct in our inclinations for passion. We're also distinct on our subconscious levels. Some people have a greater capacity to go into overdrive, to have, to draw from their adrenaline, to work non-stop than others, and so on. Chassidus makes the following argument. Underneath all the layers of a Jew, there's a so-called essence, and a lot of fancy names. But this essence of the soul, after you get rid of all the fancy names, is a portion of ourselves which is intimately connected to God. And Chassidus says, there's no such thing as a bigger piece or a smaller piece of this intimate connection to God. Every Jew has a soul. The soul has a lot of levels, a divine soul. The essence of the divine soul, what's called the Yechidah Shabenefesh, the Pintel Yid, the point that makes us all the same, notwithstanding how different we are, is such that you can't have more of it and you can't have less of it. Either have it or you don't. And every Yid has a Pintel, has this Nekud, has this point. And because of that, there are no grades, there are no degrees, there are no measures in intimacy with God in as much as the Yechidah is concerned. This Pintel Yid, this very essence of the Jewish soul, is really, if you will, one of the most important emphases in Hasidus. If you want to know what it is that Hasidus enlightens about a Jew, it's the celebration of the soul, and specifically the celebration of the very essence of the soul, the Pintel Yid. In other words, the celebration of the idea that someplace, deep, 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 deep inside ourselves, we have a relationship with God that's extremely profound. It's extremely, extremely special. The dilemma is not having this relationship with God. The dilemma is bringing that pintele, bringing that point, bringing that very essence to the surface. Right? I'm a Jew. I don't know what it means. I don't feel it. I don't experience it. It says in the books, it says in the holy books, it says in Hasidus, that I have a Jewish spark, and this Jewish spark makes me very deeply like Hashem. Beautiful concept. Makes me feel good. It's just not my reality. And Hasidus is about, first of all, declaring, acknowledging that this pintele, that this point exists. Chassidus is about celebrating this point. And you know how you celebrate this point? You celebrate this point in your relationship with another Jew. When you look at another Jew, you should never be deceived by appearances. They're all different types of Jews. And you look in all different types of ways. And our tendencies, of course, are, as they say in the American Ten Commandments, thou shalt not judge, right? You look at the appearances, and they look so different from one another in so many ways. They look different even in their roots, in their racial roots. And they certainly look different in their culture, in their values, in their lifestyle. There's so many things that set Jews apart. And there are Jews who are troublemakers too, right? There are all kinds of Jews. But that's what you see. Underneath all those layers there's a point, there's a pinta, there's an essence. And that point is the truth of a Yid. And every Yid has it. And if every Yid is the same. And if there's one lesson that the Baal Shem Tov taught us, is that when you look at a Jew, see that spark. Or know that that spark exists. And when you talk to another Jew, when you're involved with another Jew, be involved with the understanding that notwithstanding how tough and how abrasive and how uncooperative that person may be, at the essence, at the core of their soul, there's a pinta, there's a point. And when you behave, when you relate to a Yid in that way, when you show unconditional love to a Yid, it helps to bring that spark to the surface. Some of the people who put up the biggest fights, right, turn out to be the softest and the sweetest people of all. Somehow it goes together. When you try very hard to fight, it's protecting your own vulnerability quite often. And oftentimes you meet a person who on the surface is so tough, and inside is marshmallows, is soft, is mush, and you're not allowed to allow the external appearance to be a distraction. And that's the experience of Sinai is an experience of a relationship with God. It's not an experience of rules. That's called Torah. The experience of Sinai is an experience of intimacy with God. And said it again, slightly differently, it's the experience of getting in touch with our very own essence. And the essence of a Jew, you can't have a bigger piece or a smaller piece. The biggest rabbi or the biggest rebbitzin and the simplest, the most disconnected Jew has the same energy. It's just perhaps difficult to access. And Hasidus is about the celebration of this pintala, of this point, and somehow to actually make it come out, to bring it to the surface. Now that's the hard part. Right? In life the hard part is not philosophy, but doing what we learn. And that spark appears at interesting moments, at times of great joy. You'll see a preciousness of a person that you otherwise would never see. And unfortunately, in times of great challenge, great tragedy, you sometimes see beautiful dimensions of a person. And we have to accentuate, take advantage of those moments when we're heightened, when we're bigger, when we're higher, when we're deeper, and take the energy from those experiences and carry them over into the boring days of our lives, into the everyday, into the ordinary days of our lives. That's the experience of Sinai. Now, having told you all that, we now are faced with the analysis of the first word of the title of today's talk, which is internalizing. I've got two things to say. Number one, you don't have to internalize the Sinai experience. It's already internalized. What you need to do is materialize the Sinai experience. You're a Jew, you have a soul, it's in there, you have to bring it out. That's the first point. The second point is, if you and I need to discuss the internalization of the Sinai experience, I don't know how I can help you. It's, when you talk about real things, talk about truth, real and true is personal. It's not personal because it's nobody's business. It's personal because real is personal. Experiences that are done in a group, by their very nature, involve an element of rubbing shoulders, of you influencing me influencing you. That's the opposite of internalization. Internalization is the truth. Internalization is me and the Eibishter, me and God. So, that's the story. Okay, internalizing the Sinai experience is you have to define the Sinai experience, and you discover that, I guess to a great extent at least, it's already internalized. And the meaning of internalization in this context is to get in touch, to find, to bring out our own already available, already existent relationship with Sinai, and let the fire burn. Let our own neshama come to the surface. Let our own neshama come out. And of course, the test that we're allowing our neshama to come out. That's number one. And the mechanism for keeping the neshama on the surface is action, to do. You got to do mitzvahs behaviorally. And it's interesting that we're all equal on the highest level, because the highest level is beyond distinction. And we're also all equal on the lowest level. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin, Moses' tefillin, didn't have any more words than mine and yours. Moses' mezuzah didn't have any more tefillin than mine and yours. In fact, if he had any extra words, it was unfit. When it comes to the behavioral performance of mitzvahs, we're also equal. And there's a relationship between the highest level, we're all the same because it's beyond difference, and the lowest level, which is, it's beneath complexity and sophistication and intricacy, just doing. There's a connection between the two. And in Yiddishkeit, this has been around forever, and it will continue to be around forever. The criteria for bringing out the neshama, and more importantly, for preserving the fire that we feel, is doing Torah and mitzvahs. And a good Shabbos. Okay.